share my screen with you. And what we can do is real quickly kind of go over any changes to the syllabus. Do you guys see this? What what you can do if you really just want like this pinned whatever, you can click on it on this document, and then the top right where it says like mute and has those three lines, you can click on that, and I think it says like pin to front or something like that. Anyway, hopefully you guys can see it. What I did is try to go through and just highlight all the changes in person. Campus is still running, but everything's transitioned online, including the psych office. So if you guys have any questions about registration, I know registration opens, I think, the earliest April 1st for some folks. If you have questions about like what courses to take or anything like that, you are more than welcome to reach out to me. We can schedule a time to step advising. If you experience some sort of hiccup or something like that and you need a permission code, the psych department is still open. It's just virtual. So you can email any of the program coordinators, and I'm sure they're sending out that email to your inbox as well. But anyway, if you want to meet with me, which you can do, I'm still there for office hours virtually, Monday and Wednesday, 1 to 2:30. I've shared this Zoom link. It's just like this, just like a one-on-one meeting. You're more than welcome to drop in and chat about life or psychology or classes or work or career, or whatever you guys want to talk about. If those times don't work for you, because I know you guys take other classes during the day, just shoot me an email and we'll find a time that works. I've also added my cell phone to the syllabus as well. If something comes up like right now and you can't get on Zoom or something like that and you need a quick way to get a hold of me, that's a nice way too. But to be honest, like the email shoots to my phone as well, so email is just as good. It's the same thing. Other than that, I try not to change a whole lot just because I wanted to not confuse everybody with extra deadlines. I didn't take anything out of the syllabus at all, so the course is still the same. Just the two big changes that we needed to do. The first one was we aren't meeting in person anymore, so we'll do these synchronous lectures every Thursday. And then on the dates that we had exam schedules, we'll do synchronous exams. So there won't be like an access code to get into the exam. What I'll do is I'll make it open during that class period. So, from 8:30 to 11, whatever that is, you can go in during that time, take the exam. And it'll be the same kind of multiple choice, same layout, same everything as before. The one difference, I won't be there with you to field questions that you might have, but feel free to shoot me a text message or shoot me an email or screenshot like a weird question or something like that. And I'm more than happy to kind of clarify, and make sure you aren't overthinking the question and things like that. But the format other than that should be the same, still just assessing what you know. So don't use your textbook and notes and things like that. It's still a reflection of you. Sound good? Cool. Any questions about changes to the syllabus or anything like that? Okay, good. What I did on the very last page is took the tentative course schedule, kind of like grayed out what the changes that we've done before, like the previous classes, just so we can focus on moving forward. And I saw that your exam 3s have come in. You guys did a really nice job. I looked at the item analytics and there was just one question that was miskeyed. There was like the peak technique mentioned twice. So thank you for those of you that shot me an email, let me know. What I did is I regraded the exam, so both peak technique answers are right. So if you accidentally got that question wrong because you answered the wrong peak technique, your grade should go up by 1 point. Other than that, you guys did well on that exam, and I'm looking forward to reading your application articles tomorrow, because those are due tonight at midnight, right? Or today before class, something like that. Okay. So I will look forward to reading those, and I'll try and get grades up within the next week or so. And on Canvas, your grades are always posted, so you always know exactly where you are in the class. So last week, we had to uh, change a little bit because was it the provost or the president, sent an email about the change of asking students to kind of move off campus, and just that sort of grace period to readjust to Canvas and Zoom and move off campus and get life back to some sort of normalcy again. So we canceled class last week. So what that means is that today we'll cover group influence. Next week we'll cover prejudice. And what I'll do is just make the exam that we were originally going to take during that class period, I'll set just like a 2-hour time limit, and you can take that anytime during that week. So it'll still have that time limit, but that way we won't chew up a whole class period to work on it. Sound good? And then the week after that is spring break, so we won't have class that week anyway, that Thursday. So consider this like a whole week to complete that exam, because exam 4 won't be due until 4/16. But still treat it the same way you would any in-person exam. It'll still have that 2-hour time limit on it. Okay. And then after that, we'll talk about attraction and intimacy and how to find love. It's kind of hard when you can't leave your house, but online dating and all that great stuff, we'll talk about how that works. Match.com was created by social psychologists, so I'll share the special formula of how to find love. And for those of you that are currently in relationships and this is an extra stressor, we'll talk about commitment and how to make it work. And why some relationships, actually the vast majority of relationships that will ever be in romantically, won't end well. You'll break up with the vast majority of people you date, right? Hopefully you just stick with one at the very end. But anyway, we'll talk about breaking up and stuff like that too. So anyway, something to look forward to. And then we'll end our last class talking about aggression and helping and why people aren't as helpful as we would like to think that they should be. So 2 kind of shorter chapters I've combined at the very end. And then your exam 5 is just your final exam. It's not cumulative, it's just covering those last 2 chapters, same format as every other exam. The only thing to keep an eye on is because it is a final exam, the time is a little wonky, just because the university shifts all of the final exam times a little bit, so students never have an exam conflict. So anyway, that's where we are going forward. Clear as mud? Any questions about that? Awesome, great. If for some reason things come up and you have questions, just let me know. All right. What else did I want to chat about? I think that was it. Anything else you guys want to chat about before launching into group influence? Cool. All right. So what I'll do is I will share my screen with you guys, and I'll share the PowerPoint just so we're on the same page and you guys can see exactly where I'm at. Right? Do you guys see this? Cool. Okay. I've also taken all of the PowerPoints for the semester and upload them to Canvas too. So you have those to help you study and kind of go through if this gets small. All right. So it's kind of a cruel irony that while on lockdown, we're isolated from everybody, we're talking about the impact of groups. But anyway, I guess that's life. So what is a group? Social psychologists disagree. The more common definition that David Myers in your textbook espouse is 2 or more people. So when 2 or more people get together, and it's not just like you sitting on a bench next to somebody and you're like, oh, we're 2, we're a group. A group is 2 or more people who interact and influence one another. So there's some degree of interaction. You aren't just like sitting next to somebody to constitute a group. So your family would be a group, your friend group, your text message chain, like the folks in there would be a group because you guys are interacting and influencing each other. And one thing that's really interesting about this kind of group research is they also add another layer, that it's not just two or more people interacting and influencing one another, but they also perceive each other as us. This is called entitativity, which is a really weird word. Entitativity, it is the entity-ness of the group. So like, how groupy is your group? So entitativity, hard word to spell for sure. Anyone ever been in a group that was like really had that group feel to it? Like some friend groups, right, are just really close. Like you really feel like there's an us, like we're really together. There's the Marines, for instance, right? That's like, yeah, they're a group, they interact, they influence each other, they perceive each other as an us, and they really have that like strong kind of groupy feel, so much that they like get tattoos on their body like Semper Fi afterwards, right? That they have a strong kind of group feel to them. There's some kind of sports fan bases out there. Oops, here we go. Do you guys see this still? Or is it not projecting? Let me try this again. There's some sports teams like the Packers, like Packer fans, like they're the cheeseheads. They really make it known, like that group really feels like it's high in entitativity, right? It's like a real, like you're part of that group and you perceive more of an us than like, I don't know, Jacksonville Jaguar fans. Like they're still a group, but they don't have that same sort of like cult following. They don't have that same sort of like, oh, you're a cheesehead, you're in the group, you're like a diehard fan. So all of us can belong to different groups, but some groups have more of a groupy feel to them than others. And that groupy feel is called entitativity. Make sense? Well, anyone ever experienced that before in certain groups? Certain families, right, have more of like a group feel to them. And the group has an interesting effect on us. So in the chat off to the side, let's get a little bit interaction here. So imagine the situation. Who would you bet on finishing the race faster? Someone who is alone, kind of racing versus the clock, or someone who's racing against other people? What do you guys think in the chat? Others, right? Nice. I love it. Blown it up. I like it. Yeah, totally. Like being around other people, like you see them, they're pushing you, right? What about this scenario? Who would you bet on answering more math questions correctly in a short period of time? And it is a difficult math problem, like a real kind of challenging one. You by yourself, or you in the presence of others? Which one would you do better on? I hear you, right? Nice. So it sounds like most people are saying like by themselves. Why is that? What do you guys think?
I know that when I'm doing a math problem in front of a lot of people, I start panicking because I'm like, what if, because I have a weird process to doing math sometimes. So it's like, what if my process is different than yours and you're going to start thinking I'm wrong? And so
Totally.
I freak out and mess up. And it's the same with like a lot of techniques like performing arts, math,
Yeah,
reading out loud. It's just the simple things.
absolutely. Like it's really tough, and like you're afraid, right? This like social pressure, anxiety, embarrassment, like the judgment of like, what if I'm doing it differently? Yeah, all those things start kind of creeping in. Adrenaline, I love it. What about this last scenario? Who would you bet on like reeling in like a rod and reel fastest? Okay, Like if your job was to reel this in as fast as you possibly could, do you think you would do it faster by yourself or if you were reeling in the presence of others? Others, right? So we have three situations, right? We have racing a bike, right? Running or riding a bike. And it seems like you guys said being around other bikers or other racers would cause you to do better. We have the doing difficult math problems, and you're saying, no, like I want to do that by myself. I'll do a better job. Then a task like reeling in a rod and reel, you would do better with other people. Why is it that sometimes being around other people improves our performance and other times it hinders us? Why about riding a bike and reeling in a rod and reel? Why does being around other people help us do better?
I think there's like a competition aspect.
There you go. Competition.
Yeah.
Some people might feel competition with math.
But
Hey,
like if you're doing it by yourself, like I feel like that was just like you're doing it in front of a group, right? With no other people like doing it with you.
yeah, just trying to answer as many questions. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I just feel like there's like kind of like this I have to be better than the next person like
hmm
aspect of it.
hmm Yeah, totally. Yeah, so like just being around other people can bring out that sort of like competitive spirit, right? And some people thrive more by competition than others. So it starts to bring up this interesting idea of like there might be like a person by situation interaction. So like the situation might affect some people differently than others. But given your responses, it seemed like a lot of you guys said that you would do really well when it came to some tasks, but not so much with others. Luckily, social psychology has a lot of answers to what of why sometimes the group can hurt or hinder people's performance. And some of the things that they find is that the mere presence of others can help our performance on easy tasks. So on really simple things like riding a bike, where your feet are literally just going in that sort of circle, if it's a simple task, then the more people watching you do it, the better you're going to do. The same way with that really simple task of like reeling in a rod and reel, like it's incredibly simple. So the more people watching you, the better you would do. But a really difficult task, like a really difficult math problem, is a lot more challenging. So for a difficult task, you wouldn't experience this sort of benefit of being in the group. In fact, you'd probably be impaired by being a member of that group. All right, sorry about that. The car race extended beyond the living room down the hall. Um, so what's interesting about social facilitation, right, boosting performance on these easy tasks, is that what is easy for some people isn't easy for others, right? Like it's really easy for, like a professional NBA player, right, to shoot a free throw, but not for the rest of us, right? So when you have like your freshman high school players, right, playing on that freshman team, and it comes down to like shooting a free throw, and it's a packed stadium. There's like thousands of people in the bleachers watching them. A lot of people choke, right? They choke under the pressure. They miss a free throw that they thought that they could have made, right? It's only, was it 10, 15 feet away from the basket? No one's guarding them. They should be able to do this. What you find is like some people kind of choke under that pressure, whereas some people really thrive under it, right? They start shooting better when more people are watching them. And one of the reasons why they could be experiencing social facilitation is if they practice that shot 100,000 times, it's automatic. It's the same way as like riding a bike or reeling in a rod and reel. If it's considered an easy task, the more people around, the better they should perform under those situations. which is why sports psychology stemmed from social psychology. So a lot of the kind of concepts of like how do people think about the group and when does the group hurt versus harm, sports psychologists apply that when they work with athletes. Anyone ever taken a sports psychology class so far? Cool. Yeah. It's a nice mix between like social psychology and counseling psychology of like how do you understand and get inside athletes' heads of like um, what sort of stresses, anxieties, and way they're perceiving problems is affecting their performance on the field. And it goes everything from kind of like coaching dynamics, intergroup kind of teammate dynamics, to like injuries and people that tear ACLs and have been out for a year and then they come back and their body is 100%, like it's healed entirely, but they aren't yet like psychologically ready, right? They don't like trust their body yet, or they fear like what if they injure themselves again. So sports psychology is a real cool kind of offshoot of taking social and counseling and applying it in a real world context. So anyway, you have like every professional team having at least one sports psychologist, and a lot of colleges having a sports psychologist that works with a variety of programs. Especially with all that stress and all that pressure, the athletes that have like burner accounts and they're getting on Twitter and like, getting heckled by fans and like trying to respond back, and like just the psychological of like being judged and evaluated by so many people, and then waking up the next morning and turning on ESPN and you have like talking head after talking head talking about are you the GOAT, are you the best, like all these sort of cool things going on. And just that fear of being evaluated and being around other people can certainly affect people's behavior for better or for worse. And that's where the sports psychologists really step in. So let's keep going, right? I went down to sports rabbit hole. It's been too long. Sports have been canceled. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. Some other ways that being around other people affects us is just being a part of a crowd. Being a part of a crowd intensifies people's emotions. And those intensified emotions can be either positive emotions or negative emotions. Anyone ever experienced this before of like being at a like a live sporting event? It hits different, right? Like it feels different to see the game winner where you're surrounded by other people versus you sitting alone on your couch watching the game, right? You saw the exact same thing. You wanted the team to win the exact same way. You're probably even wearing the same t-shirt at home versus going to the game, but you start reacting differently, right? When your team hits that game-winning shot, now you're jumping up and down, screaming, high-fiving. You probably aren't jumping up and down and like screaming at the top of your lungs in your living room. Maybe you are, right? Maybe you're a diehard fan, but like for most people, just being around other people when something really positive happens intensifies that positive emotion. Which is why at Florida, my grad school, when the Florida Gators would win like national football championships, you would have all sorts of police kind of monitoring that sort of situation. The same way when the Lakers won the championship all those years ago, people are walking outside the stadium and flipping cars. Like I kid you not, like literally getting together and rolling cars over and like destroying them. It's like, I get it. You're excited that the Lakers won, but why are we like ruining like people's cars here? It's just being in a crowd intensifies those positive emotions. Being in a crowd can also intensify negative emotions when the ref makes a really bad call. Right? If you're sitting on your couch, you're probably like, well, shucks, that stinks. But if you're at the stadium, right, when you're surrounded by other people, now you're yelling and screaming, and like some people are hurling profanities. There's been these kind of melees and fights that have broken out where people are throwing beers on the court, on the field. There's bad stories of like Eagles fans around Christmas, like grabbing snowballs and like throwing snowballs at Santa Claus on the field. Like people aren't experiencing the same sort of like intense negative emotions when they're by themselves as when they're part of a group. And you see this like over and over again in sports, but there's a lot of other kind of big events where people are surrounded by crowds, right? It was it like 3 years ago, right? With the last presidential election, you had both Republicans and Democrats, right, that voted Republican or Democrat. And some of those folks are watching the polls come in and they're sitting by themselves on their couch, right? And 3 years ago, the Republican candidate won. So for Republicans, this was good news, right? So if they're sitting by themselves, they're like, oh yeah, good. Like our candidate won, like the way that we had kind of hoped it would. Experience like a boost, right? Their candidate won. But notice when you like saw the rallies on TV and you saw the committees and the people having these big parties where they were watching all together, you saw Republicans being really, really excited, right? The same way for Democrats, right? When their candidate lost, when they're sitting by themselves, it's like, man, that really stunk. A negative emotion. But when you saw groups of Democrats watching their candidate lose the election on TV, now notice that they were crying and bawling and having a lot more intense negative reactions. Both of them were Democrats. One was by themselves, one was in a group. And just being in a group, just being surrounded by other people tends to intensify people's emotions, which is a really loose term that people throw around like, oh, that's mob mentality. Well, no, there's a lot of really nuanced group dynamics going on. But people who don't take social psych just throw the term mob mentality around. Something else to keep in mind when you're doing tasks in front of other people is not only are you trying to focus on the task, but you can also be distracted by the people next to you, especially if this is a difficult task that you're unfamiliar with. So when contestants are wondering how the people next to them are doing. So these like competitions where you're like at the arcade and you're trying to shoot free throws and the person next to you is trying to make more free throws than you can. And you're so worried about beating them that you're actually looking at the person next to you rather than at the basket that you're shooting at. Just having that person there is distracting, and that can undermine your performance as well. Anyone ever experienced that before? Like taking an exam next to one of your friends in class and they keep turning the page and you're like, oh my gosh, they're on the next page already. And now you're worrying about them and how they're like taking the test faster than you. And you're like chewing up some of your like cognitive resources, thinking about them and how fast they're going rather than just focusing on the problem in front of you. Right. You probably would have done better had your friend not been sitting right next to you, had they not been distracting in that context. Any other examples of being driven by distraction in a group process? I'll share a really disgusting example because it's 9 a.m. and that's what we do at 9 a.m. is share really disgusting examples. There's a whole world of competitive eating out there. I don't compete or engage in that. Like it's actually really gross. But you have the Black Widow, you have Kobayashi, you have Joey Chestnut, Joey the Jaws Chestnut, like these competitive eaters that on the 4th of July, Nathan's Hot Dogs kind of sponsors these. And they literally have to eat as many hot dogs as they possibly can within like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And people are putting back, I think the record is like, was it 71 or 81 hot dogs in 10 minutes? Like it is disgusting. And they line these folks up, right? And they have one beverage in front of them that's their choosing. Most choose water, lukewarm, but not everyone. There's some folks who choose chocolate milk for gross reasons. But they like dunk the hot dogs in there and like shovel them in their mouth and they're chewing as fast as they possibly can. And there's a bunch of people on stage. You're probably wondering why I know so much about like competitive eating. In Indianapolis, a buddy of mine worked for this like kind of like sports marketing, and they were creating and bringing certain kind of sporting events to Indy, and they brought a new competitive eating tour, kind of like the Nathan's hot dogs, but it was a shrimp cocktail. So they brought like Joey the Jaws Chestnut and the Black Widow and like all these famous kind of competitive eaters to downtown Indy, and they had them eat as much of this really spicy shrimp cocktail as they possibly could in 10 minutes. And the day of the event, they didn't have enough volunteers. So they were like freaking out and they called me. It's like, hey, I know like it's the weekend, but would you mind, being up here on stage and like handing people more shrimp cocktail so they can eat it as fast as they could? And it's like buckets of shrimp cocktail that like you're giving these people. There were 10 people on the stage, and what I didn't realize is that they put the most skilled, like the best eaters in the very middle, and they put the least experienced on the edges. And what I didn't realize is when people are literally like shoveling hot dogs or shoveling shrimp into their mouth as fast as they possibly can, the people on the edge of the stage are like puking or like vomiting, which is disgusting, right? They have like their little buckets, so like puking this stuff up. And it was interesting to see the real competitive eaters weren't distracted by this at all. They're sitting in the middle of that stage and they're just looking down, focusing on their only task, because this is automatic. They've done this time after time after time. They've practiced day after day after day of like expanding their stomach and eating as much as they possibly can. Whereas the folks on the side of the stage who were less experienced with this task saw the person puking next to them and got grossed out, right? That like stopped and were like constantly watching the person next to them, wondering if they're going to puke or not, rather than focusing on the task in front of them. So, long story short, a variety of tasks can distract people. If it's more of like an automatic or kind of basic, well-rehearsed task, you're going to be less distracted by other people. Anyway, kind of gross, interesting story, right? Of like puking shrimp cocktail up. Nice. Mom's walking in the background. Little brother's like, what class is this? What are you guys talking about? Anyway, group processes, for better or for worse. I think in chapter 2, we talked about this illusion of transparency. So just some people, when they're performing a task, whatever it is, whether they're like public speaking or in the national spelling bee competition, and you have these little kids trying to like spell these really, really, really difficult words. And there's a whole stadium, like a whole theater, like in front of them watching them. The illusion of transparency would argue that, hey, if they're nervous, they think that other people can see how nervous they are. In the kind of group processes literature, they refer to that as evaluation apprehension, that you fear that you're going to be judged by the people around you. And that apprehension, that sort of like fear, hesitancy about being negatively evaluated by other people undermines your own performance on those tasks, especially if it's not a well-rehearsed, easy task for you. The same thing happens for some NBA, NFL players at the combine. So after they play their senior years of college, before they get drafted by their NFL team, they have like a combine workout where all the teams send all their scout evaluators and assistant coaches, and they see, hey, how fast can you run the 40-yard dash? How high can you jump? How quickly can you like run to this spot and catch a ball and then run the other spot and catch another ball? And you literally see people on the sidelines just holding these clipboards, making comments on, oh, that wasn't fast enough, or oh, they didn't jump high enough. For some people, just seeing other people evaluating their performance chews up some of the cognitive resources, tends to be distracting, and undermines their own performance on those tasks. but for the folks that this is second nature, where they've practiced it so many times, it's easy to them, and they're going to be less likely to be negatively affected by being evaluated by other people. Any question about that? About being this fear about being evaluated, just having other people around impairs your performance? Cool. So it's been a while since I used to do my hair in the bathroom, but like back in the day, I used to have hair, and you would like you'd be coming in trying to get the hair right and the gel right, and sometimes like your brother, sister, or your partner, mom and dad, or whatever, would like be standing in there just talking to you. Ever get like pissed off on that? It's like, just like, get out of here, like stop watching me, you're throwing me off. And they're like, I'm not doing anything, right? Like I'm just sitting here, like I'm not talking to you, like I'm just here, not bothering you at all. It's like, no, just I know that you're in the same room as me. Just having you here is throwing me off. That's what this mere presence is kind of getting at. So just the mere presence, just knowing that other people are around, can be arousing, right? That can lead to that sort of like adrenaline rush and makes you uncomfortable. That starts impairing your performance on that. So even if they aren't judging you, even just being there can throw you off sometimes. On a chat question for you guys, how many of you guys enjoy group projects? There were some quick responses in there.
Oh, is it okay if I just say it?
Yes.
Say mine.
Say it.
It just depends how many people as well.
I like it. So what would be your ideal group size for a group project?
You know, 4 to 5.
4 or 5? Okay.
That's what I can work with.
Ever had a like a group project that was much bigger than that?
Yeah.
Did it go well?
No, not really. In the sense of like who's gonna take care of what we're going through, like who's gonna have an overview of everything, of each task to do, and then all that put together, communication wise too. Some people were not communicating well.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I need to get this information before this date and da 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 da. Yeah. Oh man, so.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing in the chat is like a lot of nays, a lot of like no thanks. Some in caps. I'm surprised no hell knows, but like whenever I assign like a group project in class, like you see the eyes roll of like, oh my gosh, another one of these, which is really unfortunate, because when you survey the employers of college graduates, particularly psychology graduates, you ask them, what skills do you most want our graduates that you're going to hire to have? Without fail, in the top 3 is like the ability to work well in teams. Like every single survey, time and time again, like those are always coming in the top 3, top 5, the ability to work well in teams. So it's like, okay, well, if we want to teach people the ability to work well in teams and in group dynamic, like let's assign group projects. And people hate them, right? And it seems like a lot of this like ideal group size is small. 2 to 3, 2 to 3, 3 people, maybe like a little bit larger, 3 to 4, preferably the people that I can choose. And it really gets at this idea of like, what happens when the group gets too large? What happens if you don't know them and you don't have the same sort of communication, or they don't have the same sort of accountability? What happens is social loafing. Here we go. The formal definition for your notes: social loafing is this tendency to exert less effort when the more people that are there. So the more people that are present, the less effort each individual person is going to exhibit, because they're thinking, hey, I don't have to. Someone else will, excuse me, pick up the slack. Someone else will do the work for me. I can hide. I can be anonymous in this kind of group where it's really hard to see, well, how much did this person do compared to that person? But the more people that are present, the less individually accountable each person is. So the less work they tend to exhibit, which pisses off students. And it makes group projects a real headache. But thankfully, that's only a problem in college. And then it goes away when you guys enter the workforce. No, not at all. The same sort of group dynamic works on group projects afterwards. So how do you make sure that you don't have these free riders? How do you eliminate social loafing? Either say it or chat it, whatever works for you guys.
Well, I think it's hard if there's like too many people and like the task is like not big enough for that many people. Like there's been a lot of group projects that I've been on where it's like, okay, if everyone is doing this, then it's going to get messed up because it's too many people working on the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that if everyone has like like a set responsibility and the project actually requires that many people, then it works. But otherwise it's like a bunch of people trying to do the same thing and nobody knows who's the leader and what's going on. So I think having a leader, like someone said in the chat, but also like everyone actually having a purpose. Otherwise you like there's just no point.
Yeah, totally. So some folks, right, kind of take on that role of like, hey, I know this is a group project, but like I'm gonna be the organizer, right? This is your role, this is your role. What's a realistic deadline? And some people just kind of carve out that sort of like communication kind of leadership role, which really helps the entire group kind of function better when they know, it's not just someone do this. Now the responsibility is falling entirely on their shoulder for the first slide and someone else's shoulder for the second slide and so on. Yeah, so
Someone who's
communication and clear
usually
roles.
as
Go ahead.
someone who's sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. As someone who's usually the organizer, what I tend to do is I ask people what kind of thing they're comfortable with. And once they tell me what their skill set is, I give them a small thing that they can do, and it's within their comfort zone. So they're more likely to do a good job with it because it reflects what their perceived talents are.
Yeah, just having that, that sort of like autonomy to choose is really central in a personality psychology theory called self determination theory, which argues like if you want people to be like motivated to like want to go to work, if you want people to be motivated to like want to contribute to the group project and actually do a good job because they want to, it's important for you to give them a choice, right? Not the whole thing, but like give them some options that they feel like they have some sort of choice over the matter. And then what you start finding is that they'll be intrinsically motivated themselves to want to show up, to want to do their part, and not just do the bare minimum, assuming that someone else in the group is going to carry them. But yeah. I think I saw a comment earlier about people saying like, if I can choose the group members, which is another really interesting example of this person by situation interaction, meaning like some types of people operate in groups differently than others. It could be some sort of good match between like communication styles. It could be a good match in personality of like perfectionism, for instance, people who have like higher expectations for their performance than others, or even it could be a good match between like previous history and friendships, and they feel like if I don't carry my share, then it's going to hurt our friendship, or this person that I value is going to start thinking less of me potentially. Versus where, hey, this is a complete stranger. This is someone who sits in the back of the class I've never seen before, and I probably won't ever see after this class again. The accountability isn't going to be there. So it sounds like you guys have experienced this before and are already starting to pull out some of these tips and tricks on how to get rid of social loafing. Things that the professor could do or your future boss can do when they're designing these group tasks is make it challenging. if you feel like this task is too easy, you're like, someone else can do it. It's not going to like require my absolute best to contribute. When the task is challenging, social loafing goes down. If it's appealing, if they had the choice over it, if they find some sort of like reason that they would want to be doing this task, which sounds, it sounds simple, right? Instead of just saying, here's your group project, or here's the article that your group has to read, just give them some options. You can read one of these 2 different articles, and like you still limit their scope, but now you give them a couple paths to go, to choose between. Hey guys at work, like we're gonna break up into 2 teams. Your team decide which project you want to tackle first, or which project you want to do today versus tomorrow. Giving people that choice and making it personally appealing is going to decrease social loafing. And what other projects can do is really up the ante, saying, hey, the group that does the best job gets some sort of bonus, or the group that does the best job, everyone in the group gets extra credit, things like that. You can also make those sort of significant awards linked to the individual. So now it's not just, did my team do well, but did I contribute on like an equitable and fair way? And some faculty members do a better job than others of having like some sort of like self-report of like members of the group kind of rating, hey, how much did you do on this task versus that task? Was there any member of your group that really socially loafed? Let me know, and their grade individually might be reduced in comparison to the rest of the group. So changing the reward structure can help as well. Or if you're a camp counselor, bump up the team spirit. Give them t-shirts, give them camaraderie, give them a team name, give them a team song, like all that sort of stuff that you can change the entitativeness of that group. Once you give them some sort of like us identity, then what you'll find is that social loafing will decrease. Any questions about social loafing? Isn't it kind of cool and interesting that the fact that like the group can either like help us or hurt us? It can lead us to like our absolute best sense of self, where we're like experiencing the highs of the high of like this our team doing really well, but also like the low of the low when it comes to like socially loafing. The same findings have been borne out in the positive psychology literature when it comes to creativity. You like to think, hey, we need a creative problem solve. Let's bring our best minds together. We'll put them in a room, we'll put them in a group, and we'll ask them to be creative. What you find is that the more people that are in a group, the less creative their outcomes tend to be. Which is challenging, right? Because when you think about how a lot of work meetings go, like, oh, that's a problem, let's get together and think about it. You introduce a bunch of kind of like group think, which we'll talk about later, but like a bunch of like group decision-making processes that are really poor. Ideally, what you would do if you want people to be individually accountable, to think creatively and not be stifled by the other members of that group, what you would do is have them individually like email you creative solutions, or think about them one-on-one, write them down on a piece of paper, and then contribute all that to the group, and then have the group kind of decide which one's the best from there. But let's keep going here. Let's talk about another thing that being in a group does to us, and that is it strips your individuality. Being surrounded by other people leads to this process called de-individuation. So D, like anti, kind of taking away your individuation, the things that make you, you. When you're surrounded by a group member, you become less self-aware. So you aren't thinking about, hey, wait, what is my personal value? What about my faith? What would I do in this situation? Instead, you start thinking about more of this kind of collective us. You become less self-aware, and you become less worried about being judged, which is why, unfortunately, you have some people who attempt to commit suicide by jumping off the top of a building, and crowds form, right? people kind of watching, saying, hey, don't do it. And what you might find is in these large crowds, someone in the back says, go ahead and jump already. And you're thinking about, it's like, if you were alone by yourself, why in the world would you say that? You wouldn't. That doesn't fit your morals. It doesn't fit your values. It doesn't fit your faith. Like, if you were alone, you would never say that. But now notice that being a part of a group, you become less self-aware and less fearful about being negatively evaluated by others. So I see a really cool question down here. It says, if we lose sense of self in groups, we also become less aware of other individuals. We stop thinking about them as individuals, as Bob and Mary with families and things like that, and we start lumping them together as them, or as like a larger kind of collective unit, which certainly has implications for aggression. When you have the Hutus and Tutsis, in this kind of Rwandan genocide, you have this kind of de-individuating language of not calling them your neighbor Bob and your neighbor Mary. You're calling them cockroaches and like scum. And now knows kind of being surrounded in a group, you aren't thinking about the other individuals as people, right? As being individually aware. Now what you're tending to do is kind of lump them and de-individuate them further by comparing them to animals or insects in this case. So yeah, cool question.
You compare the people in your group to animals?
The outgroup. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, so if you were thinking about the other people around you that are on your same team, that sort of in-group, you would be less focused on, hey, that's Bob, what are Bob's like individual values here? You might start thinking of like, hey, we feel this way. This is our issue. So just being in a group leads to a de-individuated state.
Would you say like that's true of like how and why cults are the way they are?
Totally. There's a lot of interesting dynamics going on with cults specifically, like your charismatic leaders and a bunch of like really manipulative and Machiavelli social influence techniques to get people to be kind of like brainwashed in them. But yeah, that's often why you'll have people like, chanting things together and making like big decisions while they're surrounded by other people. So, hey, do you guys all believe this? And getting you to say it out loud in that moment. Another cool question came up. Is this seen more in collectivistic or in individualistic cultures? There are a lot of different ways to de-individuate people. I'll talk about a few in a second here. The first one that we've just talked about was group size. Just being a member of a group, like being in that crowd, can lead to de-individuated. People in collectivistic cultures tend to value the group, value more this kind of like social harmony. So, so going against the grain and isolating yourself would be less common within collectivistic cultures. So the short answer to your question is both people in collectivistic and individualistic cultures can experience de-individuation. It's more likely in cultures where they value group harmony and do more activities within groups rather than isolation. Cool, good question. Another way that's probably even more common today with the advent of technology and message boards and things like that is online. Can make people feel anonymous, where they can upload some avatar picture of themselves. It's not even their real picture. They can choose some username that isn't their actual name. So now they're playing some sort of identity, some sort of character on the internet, and they can type things into message boards and say all sorts of horrific kind of online like trolling and online bullying behavior that they would never say to someone's face. Right? They would never make the same sort of like really cruel and brutal, sadistic comments one-on-one. But as soon as you strip their identity away from them, now they're a username, and you start seeing people be a lot more aggressive to others online, because online it makes them feel anonymous and de-individuated. You see this, you see the same thing historically, sociologically, cross time. When you need people to be aggressive, when you need your soldiers to do something like kill another human being, the enemy, someone that they're fighting against, that might be really challenging for them to do as a person, that may not align well with their personal values and personal morals and faith and things like that. What you can do to make it easier for people to aggress is de-individuate themselves and de-individuate the enemy. You see the same thing within what's it called, the like kill shelters for like puppies and cats that don't get adopted. What's that called? Like cat adoption centers. What's that called?
The animal shelter?
Animal shelters. Thanks. I was like, why am I blanking on that word?
Oh,
Yeah.
like,
So at some animal shelters, if certain animals aren't adopted by a certain date, they can't keep them there. And definitely, given limited resources, they have to euthanize some of these animals, which is tough, right? To kill an animal. So what they encourage is, don't name that puppy, don't name that cat, don't name it Whiskers and Sprinkles, right? Because it's going to be harder to aggress on it later on if you need to. Instead, call it like those cats or just a cat, make it de-individuated. The same way when people are being like, attacked or like robbed in an alley or like a gun pulled on them, one of the first things that they say is like, hey, like, I have kids, right? Like, hey, this is my name, I'm a human being, let me individuate myself to you, so it's going to be harder for you to aggress towards me later on. If you don't see me as just a random person or a member of that out group, you start putting a name with the face and you start seeing me as an individual human person, it becomes harder to aggress. You see the same thing from a sociological perspective. And I think this is the first thing from sociology I've really kind of brought into this course so far, but psychology and sociology are both social sciences and they work really well hand in hand. Psychology focused on the individual, sociology focused on the macro kind of groups and societies and cultures. Social psychology being the kind of bridge between the two. So how individuals operate within a social context. But what you find when people fight wars or go into battle, they put face paint on, right? I'm not talking about a little bit under your eyes to prevent the glare coming up from the field. Like, you put a lot of kind of war paint on, right? To cover your own identity. And it's not surprising that you see us kind of cross-culturally kind of wearing masks to hide their identity, and it's above and beyond just like the safety of like wearing a shield over your face or something like that. It's easier to aggress when they can't see you. And we saw the same thing in the Stanford prison experiment. Wearing those clothes, wearing the kind of stunner shade glasses where you couldn't see the person's eyes anymore, you saw a reflection of yourself staring back at you. What you found was people being more aggressive in these de-individuated states. And one of my favorite sociological findings I want to share with you guys real quick here is looking at kind of a historical perspective of looking at the degree of killing, torturing, and mutilation amongst couples that were going to war and whether they changed their appearance or not. So give me 1 sec and try and absorb the takeaways from the slide. All right, let's go get you some more snacks. And then I need to work. Where's Cruiser Ramirez? Okay, I'll get stay up here, I'm almost done. Sorry about that. Here's Cruiser Ramirez. Hey, sorry about that. The Cars movie just ended, so plugged in at Cars 2. So getting back to this real quick, what you find is that from a sociological perspective, some soldiers didn't change their appearance at all before entering war, and some did. And you start looking at the kind of aftermath of like how many people they killed, and did they engage in like extra aggressive on top, torturing the prisoners of war, mutilating the bodies, things like that. And what you find is the more people kind of change their appearance, the more likely they were to engage in high levels of killing, torturing, mutilation, things like that. So it certainly fits this kind of de-individuation idea. Any questions about de-individuation? It's kind of scary when you think about all the different ways that people can be de-individuated. Being in a group makes them de-individuated. Psychologically distancing themselves by not sharing their name. We saw the same thing in the Stanford prison experiment, right? It wasn't, Bob in your psych class anymore. It was prisoner 8617. They started referring to each other by name, or stopped referring to each other by name. An interesting question came up. Is this similar to having an alter ego? It's not an alter ego. It's just kind of distancing yourself from your current self. If you were engaging in intensely aggressive, potentially immoral behaviors from like a kind of psychodynamic perspective, you could kind of split your personality into an alter ego and say, well, I do these things when I'm in this role, and kind of blame it on that. But from like a social psychological perspective, being de-individuated is just becoming less self-aware. And what you'll find is your behavior tends to be less aligned with your own personal values. Which is one of the reasons why when you walk into like a gas station, they have that giant mirror. And it's like, yeah, like I know that you need a mirror so you can see around corners, but like that's the first thing I see when I walk in here. I see the mirror, I see the giant TV that lets me know that I'm being recorded. There's a reason why they want you to know that you're being seen and recorded, because what it does is it makes people more self-aware, which makes their behavior fall more in line with their attitudes. Another way to make people de-individuated is just turning the lights out. In this kind of oldie but goodie study in 1973 by Gergen, what he did in this really kind of weird study is he took 12 people, 6 men, 6 women, and brought them into this room, and he turned the lights off. And there were no windows or no cracks or anything like that. So they were 12 people sitting in a pitch black room. And that was it. You want to see what would happen. What do you think happened first? If you were in a room, pitch black, with 11 other people, what's the first thing you would do? Either share it or type it in the chat. Totally. Explore the space, explore the people, like who are you? Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what they did. Hey, who's in here? What's in here? Are there chairs? Like what's going on? That was the first 15 minutes. Well, what about a little bit further down? 15, 45 minutes into it. What do you think happened? You've explored the space, you're past the basic introductions. What do you think would happen?
Didn't they start to get like super deep?
Yes, absolutely. They started talking a lot more, let's see here in the chat, a lot more intensely, a lot more deep. They started sharing a lot more kind of personal things about themselves that they would never have shared if they were face to face and the lights were on.
Mm-hmm. In a
So,
little
so the
bit
talk turned
intimate,
to more kind of serious issues. Yeah. And it's amazing what people will say when they aren't looking at your face, because so much of the time when we're talking to someone, we share information and then we're constantly gauging, is that okay? Are you picking up on this? Are you nodding? Are you like sharing things back, which makes me feel like it's acceptable to keep going? Imagine if you're telling someone a story and they're like, and they're wincing, but like you can't see that. You can't see that they're like, giving you like disgusted looks and like appalled faces and things like that. In this study, they were just like folks from the sauna pool. So they all went to the same university, but they didn't know each other well. And then what they found is they started sharing like these kind of deeply personal issues, like their hopes and their fears and their insecurities and the things that kind of kept them up at night. Things that like you normally don't talk about around the dinner table or anything like that. And then in the last 15 minutes, participants began to get physical. Half of the participants, so 6 of the 12 people in that room, hugged each other. This is before the social distancing of COVID, all that stuff. Weird, right? So many times you've been in a meeting or you've been around other people chatting for an hour, it didn't end in a hug. Right? You weren't hugging complete strangers that you talked to for an hour. And 80% reported feeling some sort of like arousal, some sort of like attraction, sexual arousal to other people in the room. Interesting, right? That this de-individuated state can drastically kind of change what people are sharing about themselves and leading to a really kind of close connection.
Professor, have you heard of the show Love is Blind?
I have. My wife watches that.
Okay, I was gonna ask what your thoughts were on that, because we're like kind of on that topic right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. The Oprah Network is considering doing a show about dissimilar couples and their experiences. So a couple of weeks ago, I got a call to share my thoughts and expertise and interest and whether I would want to, be one of the like psych experts for a show like that. So I don't know if it happens. Great, that would be very cool. But yeah, it's such like a weird microcosm of like relationships starting up in real life and this kind of like high stakes of having to commit before you see the other person. Yeah. Let's chat a lot more about it in the attraction and intimacy chapter, for sure. So for your notes, what leads to de-individuation? Anonymity, the computer screen, the darkness of night, group size. The larger the group, the more members become de-individuated. Less self-control, less self-reflective. They're focusing on the situation more than themselves, which is terrifying when you see these pictures of the Klan. Or more recently, you see pictures of the alt-right, people in large groups chanting, just being a member of a group, right? All talking about the things that they hate is going to lead to more extreme negative reactions. They're going to suggest more aggressive things that they normally would. And they're going to be more likely to not exert self-control, reflect on whether they personally would want to do that, and start going along with more group decisions that in this case were really poor. It was scary to see the alt-right marching in the middle of the day with no hoods on, as compared to the KKK gathering in large groups, chanting, wearing hoods in the darkness of night. Notice that you have like 3 levels of de-individuation here. Large group wearing a hood that hides their identity, and you have the darkness of night. This is when you would find all sorts of horrific hate crimes of burning crosses in people's yards and lynchings and all sorts of really, really terrible things that people would commit, not in their Sunday best, not when you could see their face, not during the day. It's 3 levels of de-individuation where you see a lot of these really dark things going on. And you see the same thing in riots. right? The kind of worst atrocities were occurring at night in large groups where people felt like they couldn't be held personally responsible. A really fun study on de-individuation was conducted by Ed Diener at the University of Illinois. It was right about Halloween time. So what Ed Diener did is there were a bunch of kids around the local university, and they would go like trick-or-treating, right, on Halloween night. So what Ed Diener did is, it was like a kind of creepy thing, but he took a camera and he pointed it at his front door. And what he would do is he would record like the kids that came up to go trick-or-treating. And what Ed Diener would do is he would open the door and say, hey, you know, and like if he knew the kids, he would greet the kids. And what he would do is say, oh, you know what, I have to step away for a second, but here's the bowl of candy, just take one piece. Which a lot of us have been at those houses trick-or-treating, right? And they have that sign that says only take one piece of candy. And some people do, but a lot of people take more. What Ed Diener did is he had this camera kind of zoomed in on that candy bowl, and he saw how many of these kids cheated, how many of these kids took more than one piece of candy. And what Ed Diener looked at is when these trick-or-treaters came to the door, were they trick-or-treating by themselves? Were they alone? Or were they in a group, right? We would suspect that people in a group would be more de-individuated. And he also looked at what kind of costumes were they wearing. Were they wearing costumes where you could see their face and you could individuate them and say, oh yeah, that's Bobby who lives a few doors down? Or were they wearing like those scream masks or like, you know, those Halloween costumes that cover their face and you can't tell what kid it is underneath the mask? So he had the kids kind of manipulate those two variables for themselves. Were they trick-or-treating alone or in a group? And were they wearing a Halloween costume that was anonymous or identified themselves? And this is the results that he found of the percent of kids that took more than one piece of candy. So from someone who's taken a stats class or a research methods class, what's going on in this graph? What are the main takeaways?
That people that are wearing masks are more likely to take more than one piece.
Yeah, so the identified versus anonymous, that the blue bars are higher than these green bars. Yeah, absolutely. Wearing a mask causes you to engage in more aggression, or wearing a mask causes you to transgress by stealing more candy than you're supposed to.
And if you're in a group, they can't exactly pinpoint who did it in the group, so they're more likely to take candy when they're in groups.
Totally. So just being in a group, right? These two bars over here on average are probably around right here. People that trick-or-treated in a group stole significantly more candy than people who trick-or-treated alone, right? These two bars over here are higher than these two bars. Absolutely. So those are the two main effects. Being in a group matters, and being anonymous or identified matters. Is there an interaction between the two? Yeah, right. Which bar like stood out the most? This one right here, right? These folks, almost 60% are stealing more candy than they're supposed to. This is that interaction by saying like your chances of stealing more candy, right, really depend on being in a group and wearing a Halloween costume that hides your identity. That's just kind of like double whammy that has a bigger effect. So to finish up this de-individuation point, how can you take it away? One of the things that you can do is just make people kind of personally responsible. So calling them out beyond their username and saying, no, you're Bob. By pulling off their mask and say, I see you. Or making, shifting the the responsibility is not like the clan decided this. It's like you are a member of the clan. You made this decision too. So making people individually accountable, making them more self-aware by turning the lights on, by video recording them, by having the mirror where they can see themselves, or calling them out by name, like bringing the self-awareness back to them. I think a few weeks or months ago, we talked about moral hypocrisy, on why like Christians do shady things like everybody else, right? And if you remember, the only way to get rid of moral hypocrisy uh, uh, was to put people in a room with like a mirror so they could see themselves, increase self-awareness. You had a stack of Bibles that reminded them of their own morality, and you made it really clear by like flipping the coin, heads or tails, of heads mean I win, tails mean they win. So take away all the ambiguity out of it. It wasn't until you started increasing this sort of like self-awareness that you really got people to stop stealing and started acting morally. And the last thing that's really important, if you find yourself being aggressed or bullied or anything like that, is kind of humanizing. So not just using language of their cockroaches, right? Not this kind of dehumanization language, but saying, no, 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 like this is Bobby, they have a family, this is their values, this is what they believe in. It's harder to aggress to someone that you kind of have the name in the face to. Any questions about how to flip this around? Cool. All right, let's keep going. So when people make decisions in group, you often find that just simply being around other people leads to more extreme attitudes. This is referred to as group polarization. So the group produced enhancements of members' pre-existing tendencies. So you see this in conventions, both on the Democrat and Republican side, when people are kind of rallying behind a candidate. At first, you're like, do I really like this person? Maybe a little bit. And then when you go to the event, you're surrounded by other people afterwards, even though you were like kind of slightly favoring this candidate, by the end of the rally or end of the convention, you have a lot more extreme attitudes. So it tends, just being around other people that have similar attitudes as you leads to a more extreme shift. And you see this in politics, you see this in sporting events, you see this in juries where people have to make certain decisions and have pre-existing attitudes that change over time. And unfortunately, you see in these group contexts, especially the larger the group, again, when people are wearing hoods and feel de-individuated, those more extreme attitudes can result in aggression. So psychologists, when they first started studying this kind of group polarization, they got it wrong. What they found is a kind of risky shift. So what they would do is they would present participants with this scenario. Imagine a woman named Amanda. Amanda is a waitress at this kind of like diner. She doesn't make a whole lot of money, but she makes like just enough money to support her and her young daughter. So it's like she's just getting by, but she certainly isn't getting rich by any means, and certainly isn't like living the dream that she wanted for her and her daughter, kind of barely getting by. Amanda is a really good writer, and she's thinking that if she were to kind of take some time off work, that she could really develop this manuscript, that she could write this book, pitch it to editors, and potentially like risk a lot by quitting her job, but like going all in on her dream to become a writer. And that way she could potentially become famous and earn more money and live the life that she always wanted for her and her daughter. What do you think Amanda should do? And it's kind of tough, right? You're like, I don't want you to put your kid at risk. And even though you aren't getting, really thriving, like at least you're getting by. But should you go for it? Like you're setting a good example for your daughter to like pursue your dreams, but it might be kind of risky. I don't really know. when you ask people on a 1 to 7 scale, like, how do you feel? Should she play it safe or should she go for it? You found people being like, well, maybe a 4.1, 4.5, like maybe I'm kind of in the middle. I kind of think she should go for it. I'm kind of leaning that way. And when you ask people as a group to start thinking about what she should do and like making a decision as a group, what you started to find is that the group started to become more extreme. And by the end of chatting with their peers, by the end of that conversation, they were all about, yes, absolutely, Amanda, go for it. You go, girl, like you do your thing, quit that job, go for life. And they're like, how interesting, right? That their attitudes shifted so much. So they called it, I missed that. What they did is they called it the risky shift phenomenon, because they thought when you were in a group, the group tended to make more risky decisions, but they were wrong. It was just that example that people tend to lean a little 4.1, 4.5. They were kind of leaning like she should go for it. So when they were in a group, they became more extreme in their attitudes. If the group is initially leaning kind of negative, like, oh no, she should really play it safe, she shouldn't do that, then being in a group makes them more extreme. So today they don't call it the risky shift phenomenon. Instead, they call it group polarization, meaning wherever the individual and the group are kind of leaning first, when you talk about that decision as a group, you tend to become a lot more confident, a lot more extreme in your idea. That makes sense? Cool. That should scare you when, hopefully not when, but if you're ever on trial and you have 12 of your peers trying to make a decision on whether you're guilty or extreme. They probably don't know. They're probably, well, there's some evidence that she's guilty, some evidence that she's innocent, I'm not really sure. Maybe they're leaning one way versus the other. Coming together and deliberating as a jury, the attitudes tend to become more extreme and they make their recommendation.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So from what I'm understanding, it's not that like the group makes you change your mind. The group brings out what you really feel.
To a more extreme extent. So
Okay.
what you really felt was like, I'm slightly in favor of this, or I'm slightly opposed. But when you're surrounded by other people who feel the same way that you did, like slightly, you now, after that meeting, become a lot more extreme. So they changed your attitude to go from like, well, maybe like a 5 to a 7, or maybe I was a 3 now to a 1.
So how would you like explain like with juries that aren't unanimous?
Yeah.
Like, is it because some of those people resonated with some people and some resonated with other people on how they felt? Like, do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, they report a lot of pressure from the other group members to be on the same page. So initially they'll hold votes kind of privately, like anonymously, to get people to answer more honestly about how they're truly feeling. Because when you have people making that decision like verbally, like I think they're innocent, I think they're guilty, it puts a lot of kind of social pressure to be on the same page, especially if it's 11 to 1. If you're the only person with that dissenting viewpoint, we saw the pressure to conform in the Solomon Ash Wide study. As soon as you have at least one other person in that group that says, well, I think they're innocent too, as soon as you have that other dissenting viewpoint, you're much more likely to go against the grain. But yeah, this is scary stuff, right? Where you have people in parts of the globe where it's like, hey, there's bombs going off. My family, we have loved ones that have been harmed, that like I can't go to the store, I can't live my life. I see, you know, US military presence from across the globe. Like, I don't love this. I'm a maybe 3 on a 1 to 7 scale. And then you start surrounding yourself with other people that are like, yeah, I hate this too. I hate this too. And you find yourself become more polarized in your attitude. So by the end of those conversations, you're like, yeah, death to America, that's terrible. And you start changing your attitudes in these terrorist organizations to become a lot more extreme just because you're surrounded by other people. The same way when you form like attitudes of, well, did I like this movie or not? Did I like that person or not? Bullying, this kind of like mean girl and kind of group dynamics. There's a lot of ways that people will experience group polarization. even, and this becomes even more pronounced online, because before you would have to interact with people and they might tell you, no, like, I disagree with you. Given how easy it is online to seek out this kind of echo chambers and like small groups of people that confirm your initial beliefs, it becomes easier to isolate yourself from dissenting viewpoints and just watch left-wing media or right-wing media. And then by the time you've been watching this over and over again, you're like, this president's the absolute worst thing ever or the best thing ever. It's like, no, you were in the middle beforehand with just a slight preference. But when you started surrounding yourself with only this isolating information, your attitudes became a lot more extreme or polarized. And this can happen online or in person. Cool. And the two reasons why group polarization exists, the first one is informational influence, which is a fancy way of saying you learn things about your argument that you didn't know before. So back in the day, when I was a kid, I used to love the Lakers, you know, kind of like the Lakers, but then would go to school and start talking with other people, and they would say things like, oh yeah, and like Magic Johnson played on the Lakers back in the day and he was really good, he did all these great things. It's like, yeah, like I didn't know that. I was just thinking Kobe and Shaq. Yeah, I didn't know about Magic Johnson. They started saying like, oh, they won all these championships and they have Kareem and like, and they play this type of offense, and oh yeah, that's right, I didn't know that. And they have this tree, this kind of coaching tree, and like you start learning about all these things. So by the end of it, you're like, I kind of like the Lakers. But then we start learning all of these more extreme, like all this extra information. You're like, yeah, now I really love the Lakers. What you find is your attitudes start changing to become more kind of polarized. Anyone ever experienced that same thing? My wife and I have been vegetarian for like 2 years. And at first I was like, okay. You know, it's like, yeah, like I don't think meat is the devil or anything like bad like that. But sure, if it's an excuse to eat more salads, it's probably a healthy thing. So I was like, yeah, I kind of think it's a good thing. But then over time, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that like it made you more healthy and decrease your risk of like heart attack and like all these other things. And then you start realizing about global warming, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that the extent to which we're farming animals was like leading to global warming. And man, like you start watching some more documentaries, you're like, man, I didn't realize about like the potentially inhumane ways that they're harming animals and cultivating animals. And yeah, that's pretty rough. You start learning all this information. So by the end, you're like, yes, I'm very extreme in this belief, just because you're learning things along the way. The other reason why group polarization is effective is normative influence. You want to belong to the group. So what you're finding is, you know what, like if I kind of like this movie, but you're surrounded by all your friends and they think it's the best movie ever, you're like, I don't want to disagree with you guys. I don't want to be excluded or ostracized. In fact, I really want to be included by this group. So I really love the movie. And you start, you know, changing your attitudes to fit with that group just from a need to belong. Another part of normative influence is this kind of social comparison process where we evaluate our own attitudes compared to the other people inside and outside of our groups. So it's like, man, I kind of like the movie, but they really did, and I want to be like them. I'm going to shift my attitude a little bit. And when I start comparing myself to people that I don't like, they dislike the movie, I'm really different from them. So just this kind of social comparison process makes people want to fit in with the group. They start having more extreme attitudes than they really did before.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was thinking of like the movie example for like informational influence. Would you say that's more of a normative, and why?
If you learn about how the director made the movie, and you're like, I didn't know that before. That makes me appreciate it even more. Or I didn't know they had to like shoot this film this way, and I didn't realize that this was a real story. We start learning more information that can change your attitude to be more extreme. If it's not given information, it's just because you want to fit in with that group. If you're comparing yourselves to other members of that group out of this like need to belong and like comparing um, your own opinion to the people you want to be like. Now you're not learning anything new. It's just the people I like that, so I'm going to shift my attitude to be more extreme. We saw the same thing when it came to conformity, right? We had normative, or we had informational conformity and normative conformity, kind of getting at that same thing of like, are you conforming because you're trying to get the answer right, or are you conforming because you don't want to be different from the group? And in real life, the world is complex and people can experience both at the same time, right? They want to fit in with a group, and then they start learning more facts along the way. Cool. So a different concept from group polarization that people often get confused. Group polarization is your initial idea became more extreme because of information or normative influence. In groupthink, what happens is when you were coming across a decision together, you weren't sure what the answer was, so you brought people into a group. And when you find when the group comes together to make a decision, they often fail to make a good decision. And this is because concurrent seeking becomes so dominant, meaning the pressure to all get along, the pressure to all be on the same side is so strong in a group that's incredibly cohesive that it overrides any realistic appraisal of alternative courses of action, which is a fancy way of saying, like, I privately know this is a bad idea. I want to tell you that you're wrong, but I look around the room and everyone else in this group is saying, yeah, this is awesome, go for it. And you just want to, like, the group to be on the same page so drastically that you don't step in and say, actually, this is a bad decision, even though multiple people might privately be personally disagreeing with it. Would you give Birdie a toy? Thanks. So some of the characteristics of groupthink is having a really cohesive group. So either like a friend group where you like can't disagree with anybody or they'll kick you out, or a family led by a really like a really tight-knit family where no one disagrees with each other at all, or some sort of like work group meeting where like you fear that if one person starts speaking differently, then it'll threaten the whole kind of group dynamic. So these groups are more cohesive, they're high in entitativity. You tend to see more groupthink. Another characteristic is the isolation of the group from dissenting viewpoints. Meaning you want the group to get along, you want the group to come to a decision so badly that, yeah, I could introduce some counter evidence, but it's only gonna like muck things up. It's only going to muddy the waters and make it a little bit more confusing and only like potentially screw things up. So I'm not gonna share my opinion. I'm not gonna introduce evidence that might contradict the group. And the last characteristic is a really directive leader. So someone that is like clearly the number one that can shut down dissenting viewpoints as well. So here's a a cartoon that kind of gets at this groupthink idea. You have a really directive leader that says, and we are firmly opposed to this idea, right? We're firmly opposed to any form of groupthink. And you have all the members of the board that just want to get along. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to stand out and say, yep, right, absolutely, that's it. Even though they might privately disagree, they don't want to be that one person that dissents from the group. So when it comes to the group making a decision, they might make a really poor one because they weren't really weighing the pros and cons all that well. So I realize that class has been going on for quite a while. Do you mind if we take a quick 5-minute break? All right, so it's like 10:05 right now. Let's come back at 10:10, grab some snacks, take a quick bathroom break, and we'll come back in like 5 minutes or so. Sound good? Cool. All right. sitting by yourself, either in your room or in the living room. Okay. Yeah. Let me get you some more snacks. Okay. No. Stay away. Okay. Don't come in. Dad's working. Okay. All right.
How old is she again?
9 months.
How old is she again?
9 months.
Baby.
Yeah, just woke up from her nap.
I was about to ask you to see your baby. I don't think so.
Hey, how you guys doing? You know, with all this going on. I mean, for everybody too, as well. I was just wondering how everybody's doing. You know, being quarantined and you know, spending quality time with one another.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
Spending lots of quality time with this one.
Nice.
Right?
All right.
Not gonna answer.
I feel it. I feel it. Yeah, definitely.
Does someone else have a kid in there? Oh, I thought she said spend a lot of time with this one.
And then, you know, we can also like put that as a group thinking too. It's like, you know, what we think about all that's going on now. Like some people, oh, I wish that this wasn't happening, but, like thinking about like things that are very
Yeah.
positive and yeah, in ways of like, oh, what's gonna help the situation here? Yeah.
Yeah. So the clearest example of groupthink would be members of the president's cabinet coming together saying, what should we do? How long should we be locked down? What sort of restrictions should we make? Should we put pressure on this versus that to change the economy? Like all that stuff. And what you might find in some dynamics is a really directive leader where because they've like fired other members of the cabinet, there might be a lot of pressure on the people that like they don't want to disagree, you know, so they might have a dynamic like this, right, where you have a really directive leader and they're kind of agreeing with things because they privately don't want to get fired, or they don't want to present this idea that maybe the group isn't on the same page. Luckily, I think this decision is so big that there's so many voices involved and so many experts in various areas that a lot of dissenting viewpoints are being aired. So hopefully the smartest and best decision is coming out. Hopefully. We can pray. So let's keep going. We have a few more slides, and then we'll call it a day. Another characteristic of groupthink is the members of the group share what's called an illusion of unanimity. So they have this illusion, this belief that the group is unanimous, that they're all on the same page, thinking the same way, but that's not really true. So in this example, this kind of cartoon, you have all these people out loud saying, yep, totally agree, yep, I, that's right. But then individually, they might be thinking, hey, maybe I'm the only one here who doesn't think this is a good idea. But because they aren't saying that out loud, they might think that the other members of the group all agree with it, although privately each person might have a different idea. Any questions about this illusion of unanimity?
Is that like impossible then? Like, is it not real?
This illusion of
No, like unanimity in general, like
it's possible if you don't have a directive leader, you have dissenting viewpoints, it's possible that like every member of that committee is all on the same page. But this illusion of unanimity is saying, well, like maybe I'm the only one who privately disagrees, and I think they're all agreeing with this. No one is speaking up that this is a bad idea, so that must mean that they all think this is a really good idea. And what happens is people don't want to be the one person that kind of breaks that group dynamic. So they go along with ideas that they privately think might be bad just because of this groupthink pressure. And the irony is if they were to speak up and say, you know what, actually, I think this is a bad idea, other members might say, you know what, I share that concern. It can be a true illusion of unanimity in these situations of groupthink. Does that help clarify? Good. Cool. So in groupthink, you have just this huge pressure towards conforming. You can experience self-censorship, which is a fancy way of saying that like people won't speak up, even though they might personally disagree. So they'll censor themselves. Another common hallmark of groupthink is mind guards. That there are certain members of the group that will emerge that will block the group and the directive leader from hearing any dissenting viewpoints, which is a really rough idea. You saw this with JFK when he was deciding what to do with kind of communist Cuba and the Cold War, and like, what should we do? Maybe we should go in there and we should try and assassinate Fidel Castro. Maybe we should have this kind of Bay of Pigs where we send troops down to the beaches of Cuba and we like try and overthrow the government and kill Fidel Castro. And this was a decision, right? So you have a directive leader, JFK, the president of the United States, pulling together members of his cabinets saying, I think we should do this, but what do you guys think? As soon as the president says, I think we should do this, it puts a lot of pressure on the group to be like, oh yeah, totally. If you think so, I think so too. To create that sort of groupthink idea. And there were some aides that were saying like, hey, what if this goes south? Like, what if this goes really, really bad? And what some of the cabinet members were doing is preventing those aides from sharing that information of like what what would happen if our military troops got stopped or got stranded there, or if this went south, and they blocked the president from hearing those dissenting viewpoints. So by the end of the meeting, it seemed like everyone agreed and there was no dissenting viewpoints, and they moved forward with it. And the Bay of Pigs didn't end well, and it led to an escalation in the Cold War. So the reason why I bring up that example is because of those mine guards that were literally blocking the group from important information. Here's a great pick. Groupthink, who needs a good idea when we can all agree on a bad one? So although groupthink is common, you guys undoubtedly will experience it in your future careers, with their future bosses, where you guys have to form committees and come together. There are ways to structure that group where you ask people, all right, what are the pros and cons? So setting the stage right off the bat that, hey, not everyone's going to agree on this, and there are pros and cons, we have to weigh both. The group committees that come to the poor decisions are the ones that say, that have a strong directive leader that says, I think we should do this, but what do you guys think? And it puts the pressure to everyone kind of fall in line and not share dissenting viewpoints. So that's when groups have problems. But luckily, individual people can influence a group, although it's hard for them to do so. If a group member consistently disagrees with a group, it's referred to as this minority slowness effect. If they consistently say, you know what, like, I disagree, just constantly being that consistent voice of saying, I disagree with this, over time will shift the group in that direction. And you certainly see that in politics today. If a group member is self-confident, saying, I know you guys believe this, but I'm confident you're wrong because of X, Y, and Z, that individual is going to be more influential on the group than someone saying, well, I know you guys feel this way, but maybe I think I might disagree because potentially. As soon as you lose that sort of self-confidence when you present those dissenting viewpoints, you're going to have less of an impact on the group. And the last thing I want to talk about is the most influential group members are the ones that defect from the majority. The individuals that really change the group are the ones that say, you know what, I used to agree with you. I used to think this was a good idea, but now I don't. And what that does is it triggers, it's like, hey, wait, this person was like us. They were similar to us, but something changed along the way. What did they learn? What was so persuasive to them that it changed their idea? So people that defect from the majority are incredibly persuasive to the group, which is kind of ironic because the group tends to really dislike the people that are the black sheep that tend to defect from the majority. Here are some other examples, right? The kind of social movement on the top left of Iraq veterans against the war. You know, it's one thing for a bunch of, you know, like college students to be out on the street saying, hey, like, I think this war is bad. Like, yeah, I get it. But what about someone who was like, I was in the war, I was there. I used to think it was a good idea, but now I don't. Those voices are going to be even more influential to change the group. One of the things that makes me proud to be a Christian is like the best examples of people like being persuasive in their faith and like really reaching out and connecting to people are not the self-righteous holier than thou, like, oh, I always thought this was right and I always acted well and like you just need to like figure it out and join the club. Instead, what you find is all of the disciples and the most persuasive people today are saying, you know what, like, I was a sinner too. I screwed up, I fell short, I used to make so many mistakes. I was just like you, but I made some decisions. You know, it's like I realized my life wasn't going in the direction that I wanted. I wasn't having that same sort of outcome that I wanted to. As soon as you have those people that people can connect with and realize that they used to be like me, but now they changed, those voices are the most persuasive. And the last thing I want to do is leave you guys with a quick little YouTube video that you can watch. It's an advertisement that's aired very frequently during the presidential cycles of this defection from the majority idea. What they'll do is they'll have like confessions of a Republican or confessions of a Democrat. And what they'll have like is a former Republican talk about, hey, you know what, I used to support, you know, Barry Goldwater, but I can't do it anymore. You know, it's like, whoa, because what they're trying to do is take those other Republicans that are kind of on the fence and say, your group used to think this was a great candidate, you used to vote this way, but now I don't. It's like, what was so influential for that person that they were like me and now they switched? That confession of a former Republican is going to be a lot more persuasive than just some Democrat saying, yeah, your candidate's bad because of X, Y, and Z. Defecting from the majority is going to be more influential. So I will let you guys watch that. The link is in the lecture slides, and that's all I have for you guys today. Any questions about group dynamics or anything I can answer for you guys? So thank you guys for being so patient and meeting online via Zoom. I wish we were face to face, but this is the next best thing. I'm glad to see you guys this way, if nothing else. I will see you guys next Thursday, same time, same place, and we'll talk about, I believe, prejudice is our next chapter. Cool. All right. Thanks for coming. Be safe, and I will see you guys next week. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye, guys. Bye. Bye. Bye.